look good, and there was no reason why comedy should just be sort of creaking scenery and sort of the same old bed-sit land.
Prisoner, attention! Lift turn!
Do it as you would do drama, and so that there was a kind of reality to it all, so in the proper surroundings. Then the madness could sort of take off.
Well, anyone can do that.
Michael and Terry's insistence on making a quality programme was paying dividends for cast and crew alike, but there was a twist in the tale.
Terry Hughes was very, very important in I suppose, giving me the confidence to do these shows. And he accepted that they were different and liked what was different about them, and up to a point fought the BBC to get them right. But I do remember that we really coasting along. We'd done about 2 or 3, and then suddenly Terry was promoted or offered the job of assistant head of light entertainment and went, and I suddenly felt a little bit bereft.
I didn't realise until I read in his diaries how ticked off he was. I didn't realise it was such a bruising thing. I'm flattered that it was, but I feel bad that he felt I was abandoning him.
After the BBC desk job, Terry Hughes moved to Hollywood, and in 1982 was the perfect choice to direct the concert documentary Monty Python Live at the Hollywood Bowl. He would then bring his expertise to comedy series like The Golden Girls, Third Rock from the Sun and Friends. But back in dear old Blighty, a replacement producer was urgently needed for ripping yarns. Ex-Goodies director Jim Franklin pluckily volunteered to pick up the baton and take on the task of a northern tale.
But that day, I climbed up on Scanley Tor, and as I looked out over the familiar grey world around me, I knew we were right. I had to do something with my life. Something that would stretch my capabilities to the limit and make me into a man. I applied for a job in the bank.
I suppose the ripping yarns were taking an area of which stories were written about and then seeing what the main characters were like in those stories and then pushing them either beyond the limits or sort of making them come at it from a rather oblique angle. So there were lots of stories about Yorkshire, young Yorkshire mining lads and all that, you know, and their pluck, and they'd save a dog on top of a hill or something like that at risk of their own life. But they were always actually quite boring people.
It was the same with me dad. He'd pretend to be French when he came in, hoping I wouldn't talk to him.
Oh, quel journée au bastellateur. Je suis très fatigué, demande, Vera.
Oh, yes, dear.
So you got the idea that they were boring, and then, you know, you'd fill out what was this, how did this boredom show itself? Because of a session with rainfall and precipitation and shovels and all that.
Irene, guess who's got a new shovel then?
Oh, shut up, you boring little tit.
And, yeah, it's not that far from me. My father used to go out and had a rain gauge and used to take the temperature and all that sort of thing. So I could almost understand this thing.
Do you find me boring? Shut up!
Life changes forever for the world's most boring man when he's involved in a bank raid.
One of those brilliant bits of casting in the whole series was Ken Colley as the robber in the testing of Eric Althwaite. You know, he's not a big thug, but he just made the part, I thought. He was brilliant.
I mean, would you honestly say if you found me boring?
Well, we were up in County Durham, and there's a waterfall there which is the highest fall in England, and it was in spate because it was spring. And Michael said, we're going to jump off the top of there and we're going to fall down them. And I said, oh, yes, that's fine.
I mean, some people do find me boring. Me dad and our Irene. Go on, you first!
And then 2 other men turned up and said, well, we're the stuntmen. They'd done James Bond movies and they were going to do it for us. So that was a bit of a relief. So Michael and I just had to enter the river and get underneath and emerge. But let me tell you, it wasn't a river, it was liquid ice.
I'm going to have to kill you, Eric.
What? Completely?
Well, of course, he wouldn't be killing you if he weren't completely.
Well, our dad always says as how he'd half kill me.
Actors are tied to writing, you know. It's the writing, really.
What very often happened with the writing is that sort of I would tend to write the first bit and get it underway, and then we'd discuss how the plot would go. Terry was slightly better on plot and all that.
I mean, in the very early days, we used to sit down together and spend the whole day together writing. But I think it was more productive to swap over scripts. So, you know, I'd have a start and Mike would have a start, and then he'd got as far as he could with his start, so I'd take it on. And it was like playing, you know, a relay race, really.
Put that away at once, sir. I have to return this to the tribesmen of the Naga Hills.
Put away that object of sin and shame.
It's a claw, Father.
A claw, a clamp, you mean? A sexual device to tickle the jaded senses of old men?
The person claw, in fact, was a very odd one because it was actually two different scripts that we couldn't take. Couldn't get anywhere. And anyway, we just put them together, and suddenly we had a story coming out, it was an odd one. That.
It wasn't just an odd plot, a strange brew of black magic and sexual repression. There was something deuced unchap-like about Chief Petty Officer Mr. Russell.
We were 4 days out of London when I began, to my horror, to notice what an extraordinary, beautiful Chief Petty Officer Mr. Russell was.
The trouble was that I wasn't terribly well endowed in the chess department, and so I had to be padded out. And wardrobe had to sort of pad me out, and even so, I had a very stiff naval jacket on.
What are those?
These?
Yes.
Oh, I've been putting on weight there ever since I was 16. It's a recognised medical condition.
The effect wasn't the kind of sumptuous chest that ideally I had a picture that I should have had. But so I gamely sort of thrust him out. But I know I was rather embarrassed about that at the time, that I didn't quite fulfil the expectations.
Well, Mr. Russell, since you are a man, maybe it would be all right for me to rub something on them for a bit.
I was helpless in his presence. I could not distinguish when he was serious and when he wasn't. I got kind of panic-stricken after a while because I kept realising that I was falling about with laughter when he was actually being perfectly straight with me. So it became kind of scary after a little while. It's slightly hysterical.
I've learned lots about, well, all sorts of things I didn't know about before.
Well, like stoking the boiler, sir?
Yes, that, and other things.
Well, I meant it metaphorically, sir.
One of the things that I'm most proud of on the series was the ability to cast fine actors playing roles which were funny, but they didn't have to play them funny. I mean, it was just the funny was in the structure of the script.
I suppose having serious actors as the rest of the cast would have seemed a gamble to BBC Light Entertainment, but I don't think it was a gamble. I think a lot of serious actors like playing these parts, and also they were written to be done seriously.
Judy Lowe, Roy Kinnear, Denham Elliott and Ian Ogilvy, aka The Saint, were part of a roster of star character actors who would appear in Ripping Yarns. The smaller parts were played by theatre veterans like Charles McEwan, who would go on to co-write ex-Python Terry Gilliam films Brazil and The Adventures of Baron Munchausen.
¿Dónde está my borroco and the piquilluna?
I mean, being a devoted fan of theirs and taking it all very seriously, of course, I thought this was, an opportunity to exercise all that I'd learned at the Bristol Old Vic Theatre School. Being a professional, I learnt it all. I learnt all this complete nonsense. I think Michael was stunned that anybody should be such an idiot as to learn this complete rubbish and not just make it up as they went along.
My one slight reservation about Whipping Yarns is that because it's Mike's show and because Mike has to be the lead in it, there are all these other wonderful characters that he could have done. And in fact, he actually ends up a lot of the time playing the straight man. And I think that's a bit sad.
If I played the central character, then the tone of the thing was set. And sometimes you would get straight actors who would come to Ripping Yarns sessions and they would want to sort of joke it up a bit. Hey, great, now we can do comedy. And I wanted to make quite sure that from the centre there I could sort of set the tone, and you had to have absolute self-belief in whatever character you were playing.
Series 1 of Ripping Yarns went out with a bang and was a hit with audiences. if not the BBC accounts department.
The first series was really well received because there weren't very many of them. We weren't thrusting them down anybody's throat. It was a kind of little tasty treat that came along.
I think we felt it seemed to work pretty well, but I'd say the BBC were always very cool about it because